Hello and welcome to episode 188 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. I'm excited for today's show. I'll be joined by someone who has a pretty decent following on Diz Twitter. While a lot of people may know her for her posts about Walt Disney World, Shan and I share something else in common. We both love the greatest television show of all time, MASH. We're going to be spending time talking about both Disney and MASH. It is going to be a fun conversation. Before we get started, I wanted to address something. Last week, there was a fight on Main Street, USA in Magic Kingdom. According to a post from the Orange County Sheriff's Department, a balloon popping or some other loud sound caused people to believe there was a gunshot. This caused a rush of people fighting through the Emporium and down Main Street to evacuate the park. It must have been just awful to be there. That day was hot. It was very hot. I was at Epcot for the first day of the International Food and Wine Festival. People inevitably did some drinking at Epcot and made their way over to Magic Kingdom. That couldn't have been good, but I also think that people are just generally getting meaner in the parks. That same day at Epcot, my friend Danielle and I had people cut in front of us in line for all three rides that we tried to ride. I understand that Disney is expensive and everyone's trying to make the most of their time in the parks. It's hot. The kids are losing their composure every few hours. Disabled people are being denied access to rides and adding new problems for people who are already overwhelmed with concerns. That being said, we are all there for the same reason. We love these parks. We're trying to have a good time. We want to relax even if we're trying to fit in a ton of stuff into a day with limited hours. Cutting in front of somebody in line will not save you as much time as you think. Heck, sometimes you just end up in the same spot depending on party size. Cast members giving you instructions aren't being combative. They're just trying to help. I have not found any cast members being rude to me or any of the people in my life, but I see the internet covered with complaints about rude cast members. I'm starting to wonder if that's the guests creating those situations. The same rules that we follow and expect other people to follow in our everyday lives are the same rules we should be following in the parks. If you walk on the right side of the road and pass on the left, you will make the parks a better place. If you take the time to move to the side of the walkway instead of just stopping in the middle of the path, you will make the parks a better place. If somebody got in line in front of you, just enjoy the theming of the queue. Those 2 to 4 people in front of you are going to add maybe 30 seconds to your day, but you will most likely end up on the same vehicle. Most importantly, just breathe and understand that nothing is so important that you should be fighting people on Main Street. Worst case scenario, just find security if somebody's being that insensitive. If someone calls you out and you were wrong, don't be defensive. We all make mistakes. In the 5 years since I have been a pass holder, I have noticed a disgusting trend towards rude guest behavior. The last 2 years, I have really noticed it. Just make sure you are mindful of what is going on around you. Think about how your actions will impact others. Do me a favor and make sure you're subscribed to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. This past week, Danielle and I shared some of the food items from the first day at Epcot's International Food and Wine Festival. I also had video from a recent visit to Fort Myers, Florida for baseball and a walk through nature. The previous week, I was at Tampa Bay Comic Convention where I caught the Jody Benson panel and gave my reactions. We're going to continue to bring you a lot of fun from inside and outside of the parks. Make sure you are subscribed and also comment with positive stuff, like videos, and share our content with your travel-loving friends. Right now, let's welcome Shan to the show. Thanks for being here, Shan.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, we're going to talk about another topic a little bit later in the show, but I want to start off because I think a lot of people who know you on social media, on Twitter, do know that you are a Disney fan. Your profile pic has you on the Skyliner. And
Yep.
I want to talk a little bit first about your love of Disney. When did it start? When did you start going to the theme parks?
So, my very first trip was a surprise trip when I was 5 years old. From if memory serves me correct, I was at a friend's house. Her mom came downstairs and said, "Shannon, you have to go home. Your parents are waiting for you. They just called." I walked down the hill and then I got put into my dad's pickup truck and he said, "Do you want to go for a plane ride?" And I said, "Okay, sure," because I'm 5 years old. I don't know. And then we got to the airport and he's like, "Do you want to get on a plane?" I said, "Sure." We landed. He goes, "Do you want to go see your uncle?" And I knew my uncle lived in Florida, but again, I'm 5. I said, "Sure." And then so we saw him and then he goes, "Do you want to go see Mickey Mouse?" And I was like, "Yes." And then the next thing I know, I'm at Magic Kingdom and I fell in love immediately.
So how often do you go now? I think I see you trying to figure out when you're going to plan trips, and you seem to go fairly regularly for an average person and maybe not so regularly for somebody who might listen to this podcast.
Yeah, so I live in Maryland, first and foremost. So traveling is not always the easiest to get down there. So growing up, I was an every other year family because there's 3 girls. So it was expensive for all 5 of us. And then once I got my own job, it was still every other year. And now it's becoming every year. And I'm unfortunately trying to make it twice a year because, it's it's an addiction, right? So yeah, definitely don't go as much as everybody else, but when I'm there, all out.
Yeah, you definitely seem to try to make the most of your trips. Are you a stay on property or save a little money staying off property kind of person?
My parents ruined me. The very first time that I was there, we stayed at the beach club. Since then, I have been a deluxe resort girly through and through. And let me tell you, that's not easy to do. And so I always stay on property. I think there was 1 year we stayed off property. And as a family, we were like, no, we just can't do it. Once you go deluxe resort, it's really, really hard to go off property, especially when you're only there every other year. Just you can't beat the proximity of being that close to everything.
Yeah, we talked about this a few episodes ago, actually, where we talked about making that decision on whether you're going to stay on property or off property, if you're going to pick a deluxe resort. And one of the things you have to consider is how much do you need to be in the parks? Some of us who do go, yeah, maybe we're more spoiled because we go more often, but
Right.
we can cut corners here and there because, oh, well, Peter Pan's a 2 hour wait today. We just don't have to
And
do it.
that's the thing, right? When you're going every other year, you have very limited time. And so if you can, right. And so like if I don't have to drive the 20 minutes or the 10 or 15 minutes and then park and then if I can just be on property and take Disney transportation or stay at Beach Club and walk to Epcot or Hollywood Studios, you get a whole lot done in those 6 nights, 7 days that you've been waiting for every other year.
Do you find that now that you do go more often, like you were in every other year, now you're in every year, it's sneaking up to 2 times a year. Do you find that the experiences to which you gravitate are changing? Do you find that your favorite parks are changing, your favorite rides are changing, even your favorite restaurants?
Absolutely. So since I've started going every year, excuse me, I'm not rushing around trying to do as much. So I've found that I've been able to take in more of the quote unquote magic, right? Like looking more at the architecture, looking more at just the sign designs, walking through the shops, and not trying to pick something just to get in and out or being like, no, I don't actually need this. Let's just keep going. Trying a bunch more foods, going to different restaurants that are a bit farther away because I know I'll be back next year. So it's okay if I don't get to everything now. Whereas when you're going every other year, that's a long time to wait, right? So definitely things are changing and it's much more relaxing when you can go. more often.
I just recently passed my 5-year anniversary as an annual pass holder. And I remember when I first got that pass, I was planning on I would go to Magic Kingdom and then Epcot, and then the next week Magic Kingdom, and then the next week I would go to Hollywood Studios, and then the next week Magic Kingdom, and then like my thought was every other week I was going to go to Magic Kingdom. And now that I actually have been a pass holder for 5 years, I hardly ever go to Magic Kingdom. Like, it's not my priority.
Right. And for me, when I've been growing up every other year, it felt like we were obligated to go to Magic Kingdom, right? Like, what kind of Disney trip is it if you're not going to the Magic Kingdom? And this past time that I went just because I had never tried the cheeseburger rolls. So, like, I literally went into the park not planning to do anything except eat because it was no longer a priority for me to spend all day there. Now, did I spend all day there? Absolutely, but that was not the original plan to do so.
And as somebody who does the deluxe resorts, how much time do you sort of set aside to make sure that you're enjoying that experience? Because I know when I've stayed at deluxe or even some of the moderates, I try to make sure that I cut out some of my time from my trip to really explore the resort where I'm staying, because you are paying a premium for a lot of those amenities.
This past time that I went, I made a full day of resort hopping and going to ones that I had never been to. Like, I had never walked or gone over to Art of Animation before because that was never a priority, right? Like, why am I out of the parks walking around a hotel? And then I was like, you know what? I should do it. It is part of the Disney experience. So this next trip that I have planning, I have 2 days built in to just resort hop and explore and look around places that I wouldn't normally, because now I feel like I have the time and actually the interest.
And then, as somebody who has to maximize your time when you go on the trips, do you find that it affects when you plan them? Do you try to find the less crowded times of the year, or are you like most people where it's just the family schedule dictates when you can go?
So it's interesting that you bring that up because growing up, we always went at the end of September or the end of October. And that was just like the assumed time, because I guess the thought from my parents was like, it's okay if they miss school that early in the year. And that just sort of stuck. And that's the default routine that I have been doing. So now being able to start thinking about doing it more often, I'm starting to think, well, maybe I should go in the springtime. I've never been in the spring. I've never seen like flower and garden. I've never seen farts, right? Like, now I'm starting to think, well, I need to start looking at it differently.
Okay, so we have spent about 1/3 of the episode talking about Disney. So I think we've reached our quota there. So everybody can still consider this a Disney episode and they could enjoy it, because I am going to let everybody know how I started following Shan on Twitter. So I'm just sitting around watching baseball, minding my business like I am 90% of the time. And I get a text message from my friend Jillian, who has been on the show before. And she just texts me.
Is that who told you?
That's who told me. So I get a screenshot.
I was wondering how that even came about.
I get a screenshot of your profile, and Jillian is like, how are you not following this woman? Let me describe the screenshot that I get. So the picture is Shan on the Skyliner. There's another Disney picture somewhere. And then, remember when everybody was like, show a screenshot of your lock screen? So Shan's lock screen was a picture of Mike Farrell, who plays BJ Honeycutt on MASH, looking like an absolute smoke show. Like, it was the sexiest picture of Mike Farrell from the MASH days.
Yep, that sounds like me. Yep, that's right.
And it was at that point, because anybody who's listened knows that my favorite show of all time is MASH. And I was just like, well, I have to follow this person. And then the more and more we communicated, it was like, you live in Maryland. I was born and raised in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Like, we have an awful lot in common, so I'm glad to get you on the show. But since
Yeah, I know.
Disney
It's so
acquired
wild.
Fox, that means that we can officially talk about MASH and have it be Disney
Yes, it
related.
does. It does, and it means that Klinger is officially a Disney princess. I'm just saying.
So how did the MASH love start?
So the MASH love started way back when I was a toddler, right? Being born in the 80s, it was on all the time. And according to my parents, I just must have fallen in love with BJ Honeycutt immediately because I would get excited if he was on TV. I would smack the TV and say BJ, BJ, BJ. And I'm sure it's because he had a mustache and my dad had a mustache. And there's probably some weird link there. But yeah, it's always been there. It was on all the time growing up. It's a comfort show.
So I'm going to tell you a funny story about myself. Very recently, I mean, it's not that recent, it's been a few years now, but I actually was followed by Alan Alda on Twitter. He follows me on Twitter. So I immediately took that screenshot and shared it with like everyone in my life. It is still, I think, my biggest accomplishment ever. And I shared it with my aunt who just turned 70. And she texted back. She's like, I remember you being a little baby and you would be in the other room and the theme song to MASH would come on television and you would run into the other room and start dancing. The fact that very early in my life, I was dancing to a song called Suicide is Painless probably is a mental health disaster that I should talk about with somebody. However,
Yeah.
it was that early in my life that this show became like a big part of it. And like you said, when you grew up in the 80s, like it would be on for the first few years of my life, but then
Constantly.
it was in syndication all the time. And I knew all of these
Right.
episodes. And then I think it was in my early 20s when Nick and Knight got it. And all of a sudden, it was on every night again. And I watched them again. And I realized it wasn't just a funny show that I liked when I was a kid. I got more of the jokes and I got more of the serious moments as well. So, yeah, definitely got me rehooked in the whole situation. Now, I want to talk about how, you know, I make no bones about it. Hawkeye's my guy, and you are a BJ Honeycutt fan. I want to talk about the two differences in these characters because I think this is why I like the show. Most of the time when I rewatch it, I start with Welcome to Korea, BJ's first episode, and I don't watch the first 3 seasons in every rewatch. So I definitely understand why BJ is.
In every rewatch. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough.
Yeah, I do still watch the first 3 seasons, just not every rewatch when I do it. Right. So the differences between Hawkeye and BJ, I think, are very interesting because on the surface, they're very, very similar. They're young doctors. They're very confident in their abilities. They are extremely moral, almost to the point of it being a flaw. But what I have noticed, and I wonder if this has any impact, like you said that the mustache was something about BJ because your father had a mustache. Well, BJ has a ton of empathy, but he tends to show that empathy the most when it's a situation that he can relate to in his own life, right? He's very fatherly. You see those situations arise a lot. And if he can connect it to a kid or something like that, he really attaches to that issue. Whereas I think that as somebody who doesn't have kids, who's in his 40s and I'm married, but I don't have kids, and I can more relate to Hawkeye, who sort of bleeds for everyone. Like he has that empathy overload.
Yeah, I know he does.
When you look at that last episode of MASH, which frankly I think is one of the 10 greatest pieces of art in the history of the world.
I agree. I agree. And if you make me talk about Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, we're going to have to fight because I will cry on spot.
So it makes sense why BJ was able to keep it together when he was over there. He had his light at the end of the tunnel. He was going to get back to Mill Valley. He was going to see Aaron and Peg. That was his, life preserver to go to another episode of MASH. And
war correspondent, I was just going to say, yep.
No matter how bad it got, he knew that was why he was going to make it through. And Hawkeye didn't have that. And that's why in that last episode, he cracked. Like, he lost it. He bled for everyone. And at some point, he couldn't do it anymore. And he was overwhelmed. So what do you think about the two differences in those characters? And maybe is that why you gravitated towards BJ? Maybe the mustache wasn't the only thing that reminded you of your father?
Wow, that's a loaded question. So I've never actually thought to compare and contrast them in that particular way. But maybe that is why I gravitated towards BJ, because he is so fatherly. He's so empathetic. And he has a reason to hold on, right? But at the end of the day, they're both draftees. They're both completely different walks of life. And they're thrown together in this situation that nobody could prepare them for. And so you're going to meet people that you wouldn't necessarily associate with, get along with, and form these bonds between the two of them that you wouldn't have elsewhere. Like, I don't know about you, but I can't, like, I think it even in Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, Hawkeye suggests that they would see each other again, or no, it was BJ that said that they might see each other again at a medical convention. And Hawkeye is like, can you see us at a convention? Like, they probably never would have come across one another at any other point ever. And I think there's something there that in times of traumatic events and traumatic situations, it doesn't matter how different you are. You're going to cling to someone and something. And back to your original question, BJ had that life preserver, right? He had Peg and Aaron, but he was very empathetic to people and soldiers in situations where he could put himself into the situation. But he was also very empathetic to Hawkeye specifically, which is the exact opposite of him, right? Hawkeye wasn't his son. He couldn't put himself as Hawkeye's dad, but he had that pull to him to take care and want to keep him safe as well, which I think is very interesting. And Hawkeye's Hawkeye. Let's just be, he's, like you said, he bleeds for everyone. He shoulders the world. He can't stop even if he wants to stop. And that's just who he is. And that's why people love him, because they want to be Hawkeye.
I also know there were interviews where Alan Alda said he kept trying to make Hawkeye more, not an anti-hero, like not something like in The Sopranos, but he tried to make him more unlikable. But for some reason, Alan Alda is just so likable that he could never pull it off, and he just quit after a certain
He's
point.
So damn likable. Like, you can't help but root for him.
One of the things that you mentioned is a reason that I think that the show really has lasted so long is with other sitcoms, a lot of times it revolves around a family or a place of business, and everybody has something in common. Like, even if you look at a show like Cheers, which is another found family show, they're all going to the bar. So they have something in common. Maybe they don't drink at the time, but he was an alcoholic before, and somebody, they're going to drink, they're going to hang out. They have something in common. But MASH found the perfect scenario where you literally take people from every walk of life, from every state. You had Nurse Kelly from Hawaii, and you had Father Mulcahy from Philadelphia. you had
Right.
Radar O'Reilly from Iowa, and you had Maxwell Klinger from Toledo. So you put
Yeah.
all of these people with different backgrounds and you put them together, and you see that people will develop those friendships across economic lines. One of my favorite duos, like if you're talking about the best combinations, obviously the best one is BJ and Hawkeye. That's just the best
Obviously.
relationship. But a
Yeah.
sneaky good relationship on that show is Klinger and Winchester. And they have
Oh,
had some amazing moments where the two of them, who have literally nothing in common, find the
nothing.
humanity between the two of them. And I don't think that Winchester likes Klinger, but he loves him. He cares for him very, very deeply. And I love those situations, getting back to what you said about these people who never would have been together if it wasn't for this war.
Yeah, and it's funny that you said Klinger and Winchester because that's not the duo I think I would have picked or that a lot of people would have picked. But you're right, like they have nothing in common. Klinger grates on Charles's nerves like none other. Charles loves to act like he hates Klinger, but at the end of the day, they really do have some sort of very warped bond because they have to, right? I personally probably would have picked maybe Margaret and Potter as another really good duo.
You like father stuff because he very much
I'm learning
plays.
a lot about myself right now because yeah, you're right. I must like, but imagine being. I mean, I guess because also I'm a woman, right? Like I can relate to that idea of you get put into this situation. And yes, Margaret was career army, right? That's a little bit different. And so is Potter, but they had each other, right? Like Potter is a father. He has a daughter. Although at one point I think he had a son as well. So the continuity in MASH is, whatever. Um, but but to be able to like have that figure when again at one point Margaret's dad was awful but then he's not and she has a mom and then she doesn't and all that sort of continuity errors that people love to pick on, but I think I probably would have picked that duo as just really interesting to see and watch and grow from the very first time where Potter is like in his office when he first gets there and Margaret's all prim and proper and she slips up and says it, makes it known that Frank is just a friend, and then to the very end where they're saying goodbye and Potter is like, don't forget to live your life, Margaret, right? Like that's really a great dynamic to watch unfold as well in a completely different way than Klinger and Winchester, which is like pure comedy.
Right. There are so many great relationships. I mean, even the Hawkeye Margaret, just nonstop sexual tension that only shows up like 2 or 3 times in actual reality. But just this, like, and then you talk about the continuity errors. Well, they had 11 Christmases in a war that took 3 years. So,
and I think Aaron Honeycutt turned 2 at least twice. So, yeah.
So let's just pick a few of your favorite episodes in the last few minutes that we have here. And let's talk about not just the episode, but what it is about that episode that really hooked you. You give me one, I'll give you one, and we'll do it until we're about done with the show here.
All right. So my all-time favorite episode is season 7, episode 14, 15, depending on if you split certain episodes in 2, is BJ Papasan. And that episode, it blows my mind that episode never makes top 10 lists, top 20 lists, top 25 lists. People that know me know that, I love BJ Honeycutt. I love Mike Farrell. It should come as no surprise that I love a BJ-centric episode. But what is so good about that episode is it is the very first time that you see that being in Korea has actually impacted BJ. Because up until that point, he has kept it together. He has been calm, he has been rational, he has been collected. With the exception of In Our Finest Hour, he's asked, what do you think, what has the war done to you, or however it's phrased, and he said, it's made me very angry. But he says it in such a calm and collected way that we as the viewer just ignore it. It doesn't occur to us. We don't think anything of it. It's a throwaway line until the very, and I say I don't want to spoil anything, like it's people are gonna
spoil away.
Whatever. Okay, great. So, but at the end of BJ Papasan, you see BJ yell and say, damn it, it's not right. And he's yelling. And the only person not surprised is Hawkeye. But we as the viewer are shocked that BJ is yelling, he's swearing, he's lost control. And I think that is just such a great episode to showcase that you can go in thinking that war won't change you. You can go in thinking that any situation won't have an impact on you and you will come out of it unscathed. And eventually it's going to catch up to you, just because it did with BJ. And so that, I think, is the best MASH episode of all time.
So I'm just going to go with a very quick one here. I'm going to go with the clock. And this is an episode where to save a patient's leg, they're going to need to get a graft. And
lifetime.
That graft, lifetime, that's right. I always call it the clock. But yes, it is called lifetime. And to get the graft, they're going to have another patient pass away. And the patient is going to die. They just don't know when. And there is one line in it that just every single time, and Father Mulcahy, who is my second favorite character on the show, I didn't get a chance to talk about him enough, but I absolutely love Father Mulcahy, gets into a Jeep, and he has to say a prayer that this one patient dies so that they can try to save the other one. And it is just one of those things that shows how war puts people in situations that make them act so out of character. And to see a priest, one with as much empathy as Father Mulcahy, having to do that, it just brings everything into perspective like that. All right, give me another one. Give me a quick one here.
Okay, so my second favorite episode is Death Takes a Holiday.
Oh, I almost used that one as my first one.
It's another gut wrencher. It's on Christmas, which of course makes it really sad. Christmas at wartime is never a good thing, right? And a soldier comes in, he doesn't have much time, he's not going to make it. And Margaret, Hawkeye, and BJ, and it's BJ that leads it. Again, I'm very predictable, right? BJ girl here. Wants to keep him alive until December 26th so that his kids, because it's discovered he has a wife and kids at home, don't have to celebrate Christmas without their dad, right? Knowing that their dad died on Christmas. And this is also my dad's favorite episode. So I very first time that he really talked to me about it in depth, he teared up, which this man doesn't cry. So that should give people an idea. It is a tearjerker. It's so sad. And just knowing that something like that could have potentially happened at any time during Korea or Vietnam or any other war after, it's just so sad, but it's so good and it's so poignant. And yeah, so tearjerker.
There's a couple things about that episode. First of all, talking about Klinger and Winchester, this is the episode where Winchester's family has a tradition of giving these fancy chocolates to poor children and doing it anonymously. So Winchester does this in Korea. He gives this huge thing of fancy chocolates to an orphanage. He finds out that the person who ran the orphanage sold the chocolate on the black market, and he gets furious.
Yep.
And it turns out that he sold it on the black market so that he could buy rice and cabbage to feed the kids for months instead of just feeding them some sweets that would have been enjoyable for a day. And nobody knows about this because it's supposed to be anonymous. And Klinger finds out. And for other varieties of funny reasons, everybody else is mad at Winchester. But Klinger brings Winchester a special holiday meal. And Winchester is like, why are you being nice to me? And
Right.
Klinger says, no reason, just please keep it anonymous. It's an old family tradition. And this is one of those moments that hits me every time. Like, I know it's coming. I can see it coming from a mile away, but still hits me every time when Winchester turns around and doesn't say, thank you, Klinger, doesn't say, thank you, Corporal, says,
Nope.
thank you, Max.
Yep, he uses his name. Yep.
And Klinger says, Merry Christmas, Charles. And boom, it just hits me right in the chest every time. And then you immediately go back to this scene where they're trying to keep this soldier alive until midnight. And Margaret, BJ, Father Mulcahy, and Hawkeye, who are really the hearts of the show, right? They are the moral compass of the show. And there's a scene where Father Mulcahy is trying to give the patient the last rites, and BJ won't let him do it. And Father Mulcahy, who is always so passive and so, he always knows his place around the doctors, but he says, no, this is important. What you do is important, but what I do is important. And he sticks up for himself. And then finally at the end, Hawkeye, because of his friend, he's feeling the empathy for BJ in this situation when he bleeds for everybody, but he's not doing this because of the kids back in the United States. He's doing this for his friend BJ. And he takes the clock and he spins it to 12:05 so that the guy doesn't die on Christmas. And it is just every time just slams at the heart.
It's brutal. It's a true testament to friendship, right? That because Hawkeye was the first person that was like, there's no point, right? Like he even tells Potter when Potter comes in, he says that it doesn't look good. BJ said that it's okay. However the exact verbiage was. So they obviously disagreed from the start as to what to do, but he saw how important it was to BJ to try. And to go over and just change the clock and everybody just agrees, yeah, we're going to forge the death certificate. It's just, it's a lot.
That's where we're going to leave things off with Shan. This has been episode 188 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. In 2 weeks, I'll start my podcast series looking into the career of former Disney chairman and CEO Michael Eisner. And next week, Sarah Says will be back on the show to start our 2-part conversation of one of Eisner's biggest successes, the 1989 original animated version of The Little Mermaid. That will be next Thursday on Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Until then, have a great week.